Welcome to Kens Korner Podcast, Season 2. It's time. Are you ready? Now here we go with your host, Ken Judge.
Good evening, sports fans. Welcome to 102.9 Whistle FM, whistlefm.com, Sports Timeout. You've got Ken Judge, Joe Moyer, and what a pleasure. We have the one and only Paul Hendrick from Leafs broadcast fame. It is a distinct honor to have you here. Thank you for joining us, sir. We really, really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us.
Well, an absolute privilege, Joe and Ken, that you've asked me, and thanks for remembering me. It's I've been sort of off the track a little bit for about 3 years, but when you spend 41 years in the business and 25 with our beloved blue and white, it's hard to leave it entirely.
Just you have an iconic voice. You have an iconic way with players. I was talking just off the air a little bit about some of my memories growing up. I guess late 80s, early 90s, Paul, when you were on CHCH TV is when I first started watching, because I never miss a Leaf game. I try not to anyway. And I just remember your approach with the players, the way you handled it. It's just first class all the way.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. I've talked to Ken about this in his podcast. Previously, I think it all comes down to respect. And, just the other day I was listening to WGR and they were talking about a press conference with Mac Jones, the quarterback with the New England Patriots. And the reporter started off by saying, "You're 1-5. You've only completed 3 passes in the last number of quarters and had 3 intercepted." And then he proceeded to ask the question, as opposed to saying, what better can you have done with the time you've had, and how has this affected your confidence? I mean, just a respectful way of dealing with these people. And I guess some of the fan base seem to think that because these athletes make millions of dollars, that they're open game. Well, they're as vulnerable as you, I, or Ken, or any of us in life. And I think if you treat them with respect, especially when you're dealing with these athletes on a daily basis, there's a proper way of going about it, and you'll get the answer and reaction you want, because these men and women are proud athletes, but they're also respectful people. And I think it just comes down to respect, Joe.
And you know what? Thank you for saying that. That was obvious in your interviews with the players. You could see the players had a lot of respect for you. I think we've all seen those interviews where the players are just like, "Oh, get me out of here. I can't wait to get out of here, away from this guy." I never, ever had that feeling from you. And it looked like they were very, very much engaged and appreciative of your approach. So I think that came through to all of us viewers. So thank you. Thank you for that insight. After CHCH TV, I believe you went on to Leafs TV, if I'm not mistaken.
I did. Well, before that, Molson Sports and Entertainment, and Ron Harrison Sr., who passed away this past Sunday. I got a call from him at the Canadian Open, Tiger Woods' first Canadian Open, and I'm going back to the mid to late 90s. I'd done the games in CHCH, but then CH got out of it. And Ron, he said, "Paul, how committed are you to Channel 11? And I said, "I'm committed to my family." And he said, "Well, would you like to come to work with us at Molstar?" And Molstar, for those fans who don't know, produced midweek Toronto Maple Leaf hockey. CBC produced Hockey Night in Canada. This was before Sportsnet came on board and all of that. And so we did the games for TSN. We did them for Sportsnet. We did them for Global. We were right across the board, and we did them for CHCH as well. So I just said, "I'm committed to my family, no more." And he said, "Well, would you like to come to work for us?" And this was September, the Canadian Open back then. And I was just blown away. And, the truth behind all of this was they'd offered Scott Russell the job. This was the previous Friday. And Scott would say, "I've got to go back to Alan Clark, the head of CBC Sports, and tell him." And my longtime producer, who I was just speaking with today, was saying that he told Ron Harrison that there's no way that Scott's going to take this job if he's got to go and talk to Alan Clark. Let's get Henny. He's going to be great. and it was through Mark that I was able to get the opportunity. Ron agreed with him, and that was it. 17 years in the books of Channel 11. I'd had a little over 2 years in Sault Ste. Marie prior to that, but it was the time to get into Toronto. What a thrill to work for a team that I grew up cheering for, and to get a chance to work in the National Hockey League. And I thank Mark and I thank Ron Harrison Sr. for the opportunity. But that was Molson Sports and Entertainment. And then eventually I joined Leafs TV.
Leafs TV. I was one of the subscribers. We were talking about some of the benefits of that. I love the post-game stuff, and I loved watching some of the old games that they would occasionally show, some of the black and white ones. So ones that were a little bit before my time. And I was a huge Dave Keon fan growing up, as many of us probably were. He was my guy. And don't remember too much about him because as a kid, I fell asleep usually by the second period.
Yeah.
So there was a great chance to see some of the games, like it or not, the outcome, to see some of the players that I heard about. And Dave Keon was certainly one of the ones that I couldn't wait to just watch.
Yeah. Well, Joe, I grew up in Noranda, Quebec, the home of Dave Keon. So my sister Susan, her best friend was Christine Hillman. They're still very close friends. Christine's uncle is Dave Keon. And 2 weeks after the Stanley Cup in 1967, Christine's mother, Huguette, calls my mom and just says, Norma, tell Paul to get down here. Dave's coming over for a visit. And I got on my bike and I couldn't get there quick enough on Gatineau Street, brown chocolate duplex in the back. And in comes Dave, signed an autograph. Couldn't have been a nicer, greater person. I had that autograph, it seemed, until the card disintegrated when I was in university. And I'll be honest, I was also the altar boy at his dad's funeral. I was an altar boy at Blessed Sacrament Parish in Noranda. His mom and dad, Dave Sr. and his mother, were at church every morning. And I served Mass Monday to Friday at 8 a.m. And when the opportunity, I remember grade 7 at the time, Monsignor Caulfield knocks on our door at school and said, I need Hendrick and Brewer, Ted Brewer, a good friend of mine, best friend at the time, and still very much so. I need them down at the church in 45 minutes. So we knew we'd got the job for the funeral, and it was packed. The entire Leaf team was there. I remember going down with the incense shaker and addressing the entire congregation. And it was a cold, miserable January day. But Dave was from my hometown, and I got to know Dave very well later on in life, and reminded him that I've got $5 to do that funeral, and that was 100 packs of hockey cards. There was a lot of bad gum and a lot of great hockey cards. Getting to do those games that you talked about, the flashback games was fantastic. Quick story, Ron Ellis. We're talking about a series against Atlanta where the Leafs engaged the Flames down in Atlanta in the best of 3 preliminary series, and there was a bench clearing brawl in one of them. And Ronnie, he couldn't remember the game. You go back in time, and there were so many games that I said, "Listen, I'm gonna coach you through this. You just do the rest." And he really helped out. But some of those guys, to sit down with Eddie Belfour, Dan Daou, Ron Ellis, I can go back further than this, of course, and talk, and Ricky Vive. It was just a great opportunity. Had to watch those games again because, of course, I'd forgotten them. But I'm sure there's games that we all remember as kids. And for me to get to do that with these guys was just a fantastic opportunity.
Wow, what a great memory, great thrill. I'm getting goosebumps just hearing some of the names that you're mentioning as a diehard Leaf fan. All players that I absolutely loved and admired. Had the opportunity to meet a couple of them over the years, and they've been nothing but first class. To their fans and to myself. So I know, Ken, I'm hogging the time. I'm sounding like a diehard Leaf fan for sure, taking up some of your airtime. You're listening to Paul Hendrick, Joe Moyer, Ken Judge on 102.9 Whistle FM. Thanks for tuning in, Stouffville. Ken, I'm going to turn the mic over to you. I won't hog it anymore. I'll give you some of Henny's time. What do you got for Mr. Hendrick?
Well, how are you doing, Paul? It's great to see you again, or to hear your voice again, sir. How have you been?
Absolutely.
Yeah, everything's been fantastic. We had a great summer up in the greater Collingwood area. lived and died with the Toronto Blue Jays, and this had to be the most frustrating season. My wife's not a sports fan. I just said, I'm boycotting the Jays. I'm not watching them again. But then again, of course, the very next day, I'm sort of sneaking a peek, right?
Like all of us, yeah.
Like all of us. And, I guess we could apply the same thing to the Maple Leafs. And Joe and Ken, I'm very excited about this hockey club. You look at that young group of three, all in their mid-20s. They've been in the league now 7-8 years. John Tavares is just doing what he does. He gets a point a game, provides leadership. Mm-hmm. He's just been an absolute rock. They've got more than enough talent to get them to the playoffs. And I think as we approach March, there will be a trade or two to solidify that defense and to see where their bottom six is at in terms of bringing in a player or two like they did with Thierry and Lafferty. I still wish we had both those players, but business is business, right? So providing this club can stay healthy and their big guns can remain out of the infirmary, I think they've got a great chance. I think the goaltending is going to be fine. I think just the overall team concept of defending, at least from what we have seen early on, could use some improvement, but it's an 82-game year. But Mitch, Austin, William, these guys are just hitting their stride, and they've been in the league almost an entire decade, and they're nowhere near 30 yet.
Yeah, they're still well down in their 20s, Paul. Actually, that's going to be my first question for you, Paul, today. What do you think Mr. Matthews, Austin Matthews, is doing differently to his game? He seems a little bit more in tune this season. I mean, he scored his 3 goals in 10 games last season. And he already started his first 2 games with those 2 hat tricks. What are you seeing different out there?
Well, I see a player who has learned to win. I remember Mike Babcock talking about how talented that core he had, but he said they've got to learn to win, and that's going to be means going through a few tough years. And obviously those playoff setbacks have really hurt. I got a taste of the good life ousting Tampa last year, and then ran into a very hot goaltender in Florida. But for Austin, particularly Ken, he's healthy. His wrist is healthy. He didn't have that last fall, and he's got that, and he's just a committed player now. And again, in this league for the better part of a decade in Toronto. We're not talking in Nashville. In Toronto, he's a hardened pro at a very young age, and he's one of the top 5 players on the entire planet. You can insert him anywhere between 1 and 5, given who you might want to debate with. Connor McDavid, arguably number 1, but I'd say Austin Matthews is right there at 1B or 2. And then you put him on side with a player like Mitch Marner, who might be the best overall player. He's just outstanding. And, I look at our Canadian, US and Swedish Olympic teams. If the Olympics were to be played right now, your number 1 center for the Americans, I think it's Austin. Your number 1 right winger for Canada is Mitch. And your number 1 right winger for Sweden is definitely William Nylander. We've got them all on the same team. So I think the opportunity to be just a great athlete, to be healthy, and to be playing with such outstanding players at an advanced stage of his career, Ken, is all reason why he's had the start he has had.
Yes, thank you. Before we go any further, we do want to acknowledge that Mr. Hendricks, Paul Hendricks, had a birthday on Thursday. So Joe and I from Sports Timeout just want to give you a shout out and hope you had a great day on Thursday.
Happy birthday. We won't need to know your age. You don't have to divulge it to us. That's okay.
67, Joe. And
wow.
And I think it's an omen of things to come, because the last time the Leafs won the Cup was in 67.
Great
so
number.
That's what I'm going on. And, chronologically, I'm 67. Emotionally, I'm 17. And as long as we can keep going that way, and I know all of us are that way, and, our bodies, we're in Madrid, my wife and I, last winter, and I remember I was on the subway and I got offered a seat by a teenager, which was just a nice thing of her to do, but it really, it blew me away. And I don't like being called, but you get called sir, and it's just a polite term of respect. It's just that mentally I'm not there yet.
Yeah, I have a habit of doing that to you, don't I, Paul?
But it's all good, Kenny. It's not you. It's just wherever you go. But I do the same thing. It's just a sign of respect. You're not going to go, dude. So
it's being Canadian, as they say, I think.
It is. Absolutely. That's exactly it.
Now, my next question, Paul. As we know, Treleaven's statement was that he brought in some snot. So let's talk a little bit about what Bertuzzi, Domi, and Reeves and how they fit in so far.
Well, I think they've fit in well. I know Max is trying to find his way on what lines. I'd like to see him get a little more power play time. But as it stands right now, I think he's going to be locked into the third line. And that means he's going to have to find a way to drive that third line. He's obviously a very talented player. I've known Max since he's been 4 years old. He and my son played together in Port Credit. And Bertuzzi, and the other thing with Max and with Tyler is they're both in contract years, so they're going to be playing their what's off to not only help their team but to help themselves in terms of negotiating a decent contract for next year. And Bertuzzi's in a great situation as long as he can continue to play on that top line. He's going to get great looks, and they bring jam, they bring grease to the situation. And then you talk about Reeves and what he does, even in beer league hockey. And I remember playing when we had a couple of guys on our team that you knew if there had to be business taken care of, you skated taller, you skated larger, you went to the net without any fear of checking, even though there wasn't supposed to be checking. But in the National Hockey League, there is, and those guys all have more room in which to negotiate with. Is he always going to be playing there? Maybe not always, depending upon the opponent, but there are going to be enough times where it's nice having him there to make sure things, or as to Mike Babcock, I quote him, to keep the flies off. And he can do more than that. I wish we just would have had him a couple of years ago, but he's still got a lot of jam in his game. And I think he might be the most important signing. The other two, obviously, very talented offensive players with a bit of grease to their game as well. That can always be needed, especially as this team tries to find that kind of personality that they're going to need in the playoffs, especially like we saw in that second round against Florida, where Florida just took it to them in that respect.
Yes. Actually, I want to talk a little bit about our young guns. Let's talk about Matthew Knies and Fraser Minton, and let's throw Nick Robertson into that mix, because I'm not so sure that with Robertson's start, he got 5 points in his first couple of games, that he's soon to be called up.
Well, Robertson is hell-bent on getting back, especially given how far he's had to come back from that shoulder injury last fall. And who knows? I can see Minton. I think they're going to give him 9 games. He seems a little out of place now that the NHL regular season is upon us. It's a lot different from the exhibition season. But if he has to go back, no big deal. He'll get a chance to play for Canada at the World Junior Tournament. He'll get a chance to grow on his terms. And I think this experience will be outstanding for him. That's not to say he's going to go back, but if he does go back, we've got Robertson with the Marlies and somebody who I think speed and skill can come in and fit into the lineup, and is obviously a little more mature as a player than, say, Minton is. And Matthew Knies, I'd like to see him on the top 6. I think that's where he best fits in. Not necessarily sure the third line is a good fit for him, but we'll see. Sheldon's going to have to adjust that lineup as the season progresses. But right now, I enjoy seeing him in the top 6. Let's give him a good run, especially on that second line, to see how he can take the puck and go with it proverbially. I just think he's better adjusted up there. And I like Max on the third line. I like the skill set that he brings to that third line. And if we can get an effective third line going, the Leafs are going to go. They're going to go a long way this season.
Yeah. Here's we're going to go off of what we're talking about just a little bit. I know our goal song was a little controversial. The Hall & Oates, everyone thought it was outdated. Then they bring in this new Kid Cudi song, Pursuit of Happiness. Doesn't seem like anyone likes that. What's your opinion on our new goal song?
I was hoping you wouldn't ask. I'm 67, right? And I hate to, I'm still listening to the Archies and No,
Oh,
I'm not.
beautiful.
I wish I could give you a legit answer. I couldn't. I've not said anything in terms of being critical of the goal song. I'm certainly sick of the Hall and Oates song. I think it's time for a change. But I wish I had something, guys, Joe and Ken, to come up and offer as a alternative. I don't have anything right now. I don't know about you guys, but I guess we'll have to settle for what we've got for a while. But man, oh man, if you're sick of the Hall and Oates song, those first couple of games for the Leafs, thanks to Austin, you'd have really gotten sick of it.
Yeah, I was wearing out its welcome for me the end of last year, and 102.9 being a classic rock station, that's what I go back to. Love to hear some classic rock throwback. I don't know if the new generation would get it, but every now and then it would be nice to hear something from our generation to get the crowd going, and something that everybody knows, whether it be AC/DC or Kiss or any one of those bands.
Yeah, I agree, Joe. And honestly, I'm not against going to a personalized goal song, so everyone gets their own song. That wouldn't be so bad either.
Yeah, and I agree with the classics. I remember taking my son to then Air Canada Center to see Springsteen, and Clarence Clemens was still in the band, but Mike was 13. He goes, "What have they done?" And I go, Mike. So I explained the history of the, Bruce and the E Street Band, and we went down, and he was simply blown away. And he's, we've seen a few other. And of course now Mike's, he's a teacher. He's 27 years old. A lot of what he does, he loves playing for his class. With his guitar, he writes a lot of his own music, and he still talks about that Springsteen concert. So I think some of the older stuff, even with the younger generation, it just goes from generation to generation and never goes away because it's so good. Maybe Layla or something. I'm not sure, but just something to get the fans going.
Another thing in common, Paul. I'm a huge Springsteen fan. Been to many, many shows. My son's a musician, has taken after him. He's in his early 20s. So that's my proud little pass the torch to him to carry on the Bruce tradition. And
actually,
looking forward to seeing Bruce coming back next November, not this November, next November, hopefully.
Yes.
Yes. And you also have in common the funeral parlor. Joe also works in the funeral parlor on his other part-time job.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, I keep busy. I retired from paramedics in Toronto and started working for Whistle FM just to support the local community, and then just found some other things to do to help out. So keeps me busy for sure.
Yeah, and you got to keep busy.
Got to keep busy, right?
I keep him busy, Paul. He has to deal with quirky Ken over on this side.
That's it. And as well, what I do, we're going back to Spain this winter. We get a chance to live over there, and I'm at a local university. I'm taking Spanish. It's like a training camp for me, just shaking off some of the rust, and that in many respects for me is like another job in itself. It doesn't pay me anything, but it certainly is a worthwhile pursuit and something I didn't have time for when I had a real job, because I had a real job.
Yeah, I just want to add. I'm sorry, Joe. I just want to add something in real quick here before we wind down. I recently attended my friend's wake. His name is Ray Lambert, and I know he was a big Paul Hendrick's fan for a long time. And I got the chance to meet some of his great family who are wonderful people and just love the sport of hockey as well. So I just wanted to add that, Joe. I'm going to pass it back to you, and you can finish this off here.
Yeah, well, thank you, Ken, and yeah, thoughts are with your family for sure. Oh, I know we've taken up a lot of your time. This has been such a thrill for both of us. We thank you so much. I have so many questions, and perhaps we can arrange to do this again as the season goes on, time permitting. But one of the things that I just really want to know, is there one highlight that just stands out above everything else that's my shining moment in your broadcasting career with the Toronto Maple Leafs? Is that maybe an unfair question? But
no, it's not. And it's something I've got to really think of. And I think it might have been the night Matt Sundin. I think, he got to his 1,000th point. Was it that? I'm going back, and he was the game's first, second, and third star.
He beat Daryl Sittler, I believe.
Was it that night? Like, I'm trying to think. I couldn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was one of those nights. He was the game's all three stars, and I got to interview him at center ice. And I think I've mentioned this to Ken. You know, we've talked about it in the past. Max loves talking about the game. He loves talking about everything except himself. And you know, that night in particular, asking what it meant to set the standard on home ice in front of these fans, and could he, you know, what it meant to do it with the players in the 13 accumulative years that he had with the Maple Leafs, what it meant to share that with all of those players. And he just lit up. And I've said it before, if you could stick two popsicle sticks in his mouth from one end to the other, the grin, it was just unmistakable. But he didn't want to talk about himself. He wanted to talk about the fans. He wanted to talk about his teammates and just how proud he was to have set that mark, given it was the Toronto Maple Leafs. And I know when the Leafs back in the day, we were in Ottawa, and they wanted to trade him so that they could get something substantially back for him. We're in the hotel, the Brook Street in Canada, the night before a game against the Senators, and he's on the phone, and it was a very, very serious conversation. And as we found out the next day, he was talking with Boria Salming, and Boria told him, you stay a Maple Leaf as long as you can, because Boria, Daryl, they had experienced what it was like to leave. He said, if you've got control over the situation, you stay. And he wasn't going to give, I guess it was John Ferguson Jr. then, the opportunity to trade him. He'd given so much to the franchise, and he felt he deserved to end his career as a Maple Leaf. It didn't end off that way, unfortunately. He ended up in Vancouver, but Mats wanted to stay blue and white right to the very end.
A classy gentleman. Paul, thank you so much for that story, and thank you so much for your time. Ken, I'll turn it over to you. Wrap us up.
Yeah, hi. Sorry, having a bit of a coughing thing there. Anyway, yes, Paul, thank you so much for being on the show. Joe, it's always a pleasure. And it's been fun to have you on my podcast, but it's been my honor, and I'm sure Joe's, to have you here on Whistle Radio.
Absolutely.
So yeah, we're Ken and Joe, and this is Sports Timeout, and we've been with Paul Hendricks, the voice of the Toronto Maple Leafs, on Whistle Radio 102.9 FM. .com. Did I say it right?
You got it. Paul, thanks again. All the best.
Thank you, guys. And now we've talked about it. Goal song, Layla.
Don't mind it. I'll take it.
There we go.
And there's how we end it. The new goal song should be Layla.